The metal gates of Wonderland Amusement Park slammed shut behind me with a sound that echoed through my bones like a death knell. I stood there in my soaking wet clothes, mascara streaming down my cheeks in black rivers, watching the last employee's car disappear into the October darkness. The parking lot stretched out before me like an ocean of empty asphalt, broken only by a single forgotten cotton candy wrapper dancing in the autumn wind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. They had left me. After 12 hours of what was supposed to be our annual family reunion celebration, after I had paid for everyone's tickets, organized the entire day, and made sure every single person had the time of their lives, they had simply forgotten I existed and driven away without me. My phone was dead, my purse was locked in Jessica's car, and I was standing alone outside a closed amusement park at 9:30 at night with nothing but the clothes on my back and a rage so pure it felt like swallowing fire. The security guard who had found me wandering near the haunted house ride looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion as he escorted me to the exit. "Ma'am, the park closed an hour ago," he had said, his flashlight cutting through the shadows, where I had been searching desperately for my family. "Everyone's gone home. Everyone except me, apparently. Everyone except Sarah, the responsible one, the organizer, the one who never mattered enough to remember." The humiliation wasn't just in being forgotten. It was in the realization that I had spent the entire day making sure everyone else was having a perfect time while completely overlooking the fact that no one was doing the same for me. I had watched my sister Lisa's 3 kids while she and her husband went on the adult rides. I had held my elderly mother's purse and jacket while she enjoyed the gentler attractions. I had paid for lunch for all 14 family members when my brother Mike conveniently forgot his wallet, and I had been the one taking endless photos of everyone else's magical moments while never appearing in a single one myself. The worst part was that this wasn't unusual. This was the pattern that had defined my entire relationship with my family for as long as I could remember. Sarah, the dependable. Sarah, the responsible. Sarah, the one who would always be there to clean up the mess, foot the bill, and fade into the background while everyone else lived their lives in full color. I was 34 years old, and I had been playing this role for so long that I had almost convinced myself it was normal. But, standing there in that empty parking lot, watching my breath form small clouds in the cold air, something fundamental shifted inside me. The hurt was there, sharp and immediate, but underneath it was something else, something darker and more determined. A quiet voice that whispered this would be the last time they took me for granted. My name is Sarah Michelle Chen, and I suppose I should tell you how I ended up with enough money to buy an entire amusement park just to get revenge on my family. It wasn't inheritance or lottery winnings or any of the dramatic windfall stories you might expect. It was 10 years of careful planning, ruthless saving, and a tech startup that I had built from nothing while my family assumed I was just wasting my time on computers. The irony was that they had always dismissed my work as a software developer, as some kind of hobby. "Sarah's playing with her computers again," my mother would say whenever I tried to explain what I did for a living. "Maybe someday she'll find a real job and settle down like a normal person." They had no idea that my computer games had generated enough revenue in the past 3 years to make me financially independent. They had no idea that the quiet, forgettable daughter who always picked up the check had actually become the most successful person in the family by a considerable margin. But I had never told them. I had continued living in my modest apartment, driving my reliable Honda Civic, and dressing in simple clothes that wouldn't draw attention or questions. Let them think I was still struggling Sarah, still the one who needed their charity and condescension. The truth was, I had been saving every penny I didn't absolutely need, investing aggressively, and building something they would never understand or appreciate. The walk to the nearest gas station took 45 minutes in wet shoes that rubbed blisters on my heels with every step. The teenage clerk looked up from his phone long enough to tell me the last bus had stopped running an hour ago, but I could call a taxi if I had money for the fare. I didn't. Everything was in Jessica's car, probably sitting on the floor where I had left my purse when we first arrived that morning. A lifetime ago, when I still believed my family cared enough to remember I existed. The taxi driver who finally agreed to take me home on credit was a kind Sikh man named Raj, who listened to my story with the sort of patient sympathy that strangers sometimes offer when your own family won't. "Family can be complicated," he said as we pulled up to my apartment building at nearly midnight. "Sometimes the people who should love us most are the ones who hurt us deepest." I paid him triple the fare the next morning, but that night, his kindness was the only thing standing between me and complete despair. My apartment felt different when I walked through the door. The same furniture, the same photographs on the walls, the same life I had been living for years, but something essential had changed. I stood in my shower for 30 minutes, letting the hot water wash away the smell of the amusement park and the humiliation of the day, but I couldn't wash away the anger. It had settled into my bones like winter cold, and I knew it was going to be there for a long time. The messages didn't start until the next afternoon. A text from Lisa that said, "Hope you got home okay," with a smiley face emoji. A voicemail from my mother asking if I had found my purse. A casual Facebook comment from Jessica saying she hoped I hadn't been too upset about the mix-up. Mix-up. As if forgetting a human being was the same as forgetting to pick up milk from the grocery store. Not one of them apologized. Not one of them acknowledged that leaving me stranded at a closed amusement park might have been traumatic or dangerous. They all seemed to think that their casual mentions of the incident were sufficient, as if acknowledging it had happened was the same as taking responsibility for making it happen. The assumption seemed to be that good old reliable Sarah would just bounce back from this like she bounced back from everything else, ready to organize the next family gathering and foot the next family bill. That's when I knew I wasn't going to bounce back. That's when I started planning. The first thing I did was research Wonderland Amusement Park's financial situation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. It took me 3 days of digging through public records, business filings, and financial reports, but the picture that emerged was fascinating. The park was struggling. Attendance had been declining for 5 years straight, maintenance costs were skyrocketing, and the owners were drowning in debt from a failed expansion project that had opened just before the pandemic hit. Wonderland wasn't just any amusement park to my family, it was our place. Every birthday party, every celebration, every family milestone for the past 15 years had happened within those gates. My nephew Tommy's first roller coaster ride. My niece Emma's 8th birthday party where she insisted on riding the carousel 16 times in a row. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary celebration where we rented the entire picnic pavilion, and my father gave a speech about family being the most important thing in life. The bitter irony of that memory wasn't lost on me as I sat in my apartment at 2 a.m, calculating how much capital I would need to make an offer on the property. Family being the most important thing, unless that family member was Sarah, in which case she could be forgotten in a parking lot like an old newspaper blown away by the wind. I scheduled a meeting with the park's owners for the following week, introducing myself as a potential investor interested in either partnership opportunities or acquisition. The Hendricks family had owned Wonderland for 3 generations, and it was clear from my first conversation with patriarch Robert Hendricks that selling wasn't something he wanted to consider. But wanting and needing are 2 different things, and the numbers didn't lie. They needed a financial miracle, and I was prepared to be exactly that. The due diligence process took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of financial audits, property inspections, and legal reviews while I maintained the pretense of being just another family disappointment living paycheck to paycheck. 6 weeks of sitting through family dinners where Lisa complained about her mortgage payments and Mike bragged about his latest get-rich-quick scheme, all while I was negotiating the purchase of a $12 million entertainment complex. The most challenging part wasn't the money or the paperwork. It was keeping my mouth shut when my mother made her little comments about my life choices. "Sarah's always been such a dreamer," she told my Aunt Carol during our monthly family dinner. "Always thinking these computer projects of hers are going to amount to something. At least she's finally starting to dress better." I had worn a new blouse that day, a small concession to the business meetings I was attending, and even that minor change in my appearance was somehow transformed into evidence of my general inadequacy. But I smiled and nodded and helped clear the dishes while mentally calculating how much revenue the park's concession stands generated during peak season. I listened to Jessica talk about her latest vacation plans while reviewing maintenance schedules for the roller coasters in my head. I watched my family live their lives in blissful ignorance of what was coming, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had a secret that was truly mine. The final contract negotiations happened on a Tuesday in November, exactly 6 weeks, after the day they left me in that parking lot. Robert Hendricks sat across from me in his lawyer's office, his weathered hands shaking slightly as he signed the papers that would transfer ownership of his family's legacy to a stranger. "I hope you'll take care of her," he said, and I assured him that I would treat Wonderland with the respect and attention it deserved. What I didn't tell him was that my definition of respect might be different from his. The closing was scheduled for December 15th, which gave me exactly 1 month to plan the perfect family gathering. I called Lisa first, using the same cheerful voice I had perfected over years of swallowing disappointment and organizing everyone else's happiness. "I know it's short notice, but I was thinking we should have our Christmas celebration at Wonderland this year. My treat, of course. I already talked to the management about renting the whole park for a private party." Lisa's immediate enthusiasm was both predictable and nauseating. "Oh my God, Sarah, that's such a great idea. The kids will absolutely love it. But are you sure you can afford to rent the entire park? That has to be incredibly expensive." The concern in her voice was purely performative. She knew I would never suggest something I couldn't pay for, and she was already mentally planning her Instagram posts about the exclusive family party. One by one, I called every family member and extended the same invitation. My parents, my siblings, their spouses, their children, even the extended relatives who only showed up when there was free food involved. Every single person who had been there on that October day when they forgot I existed. Every single person who had left me standing in that empty parking lot like a piece of discarded trash. The responses were uniformly positive. Everyone was excited about the private party. Everyone was impressed by my generosity. And everyone assumed this was just another example of Sarah going above and beyond to make everyone else happy. They had no idea that this Christmas celebration was going to be very different from any gathering we had ever had before. I spent the weeks leading up to the party, fine-tuning every detail. The park would be decorated for Christmas, complete with twinkling lights and holiday music. There would be hot chocolate and fresh cookies and all of their favorite foods. Every ride would be operational, every game would be available, and every family member would have unlimited access to everything Wonderland had to offer. It was going to be absolutely perfect, right up until the moment it wasn't. The hardest part was maintaining the pretense during those final weeks. Sitting through family dinners where they talked about how excited they were for the party, while having no idea what was really planned. Listening to my mother tell her friends about her generous daughter who was treating the whole family to a private amusement park experience. Watching Jessica post on social media about the upcoming epic family celebration that Sarah was organizing. They still saw me exactly the same way they always had. The reliable one. The responsible one. The one who would always be there to make sure everyone else had a good time, even if it meant sacrificing her own happiness in the process. They had learned nothing from the October incident because they didn't think there was anything to learn. In their minds, forgetting me had been an honest mistake, and my continued willingness to organize family events proved that I had gotten over it. But I hadn't gotten over it. I had gotten even. The night before the Christmas party, I stood in my new office at Wonderland Amusement Park, looking out at the rides and attractions that now belonged to me. The carousel horses were frozen mid-gallop, the roller coaster tracks curved through the darkness like metal dragons, and the whole park waited in silent anticipation for what was about to unfold. Tomorrow, my family would walk through these gates expecting another wonderful day of being catered to and celebrated by reliable, forgettable Sarah. They had no idea that they were walking into a trap that had been 6 weeks in the making. They had no idea that the person they had left behind in that parking lot had spent every day since then planning their complete and total humiliation. They thought they were coming to a party, but they were actually coming to a reckoning. I had been invisible to them for 34 years. But tomorrow they were going to see me more clearly than they had ever seen anything in their lives. Tomorrow, they were going to learn what happens when you take someone's kindness for granted. For so long that you forget they're capable of anything else. The security cameras throughout the park would record everything. The staff I had hired were all professionals who understood exactly what their role would be in the day's events. Every entrance and exit was under my control. Every ride and attraction operated according to my specifications, and every moment of their experience would unfold exactly as I had designed it. My family thought they knew who Sarah Chen was. They thought they understood the limits of my patience and the boundaries of my forgiveness. Tomorrow, they were going to discover how wrong they had been about everything. The morning of December 15th dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of brilliant winter sunshine that made everything look like a postcard. I arrived at Wonderland at 6 in the morning, 3 hours before my family was scheduled to arrive, and spent those precious hours walking through every inch of the park one final time. The Christmas decorations were perfect. Thousands of twinkling lights draped every surface. Giant wreaths hung from lampposts, and the smell of cinnamon and hot chocolate drifted from the concession stands that were already preparing for the day ahead. My phone buzzed constantly with excited messages from family members. Lisa texting photos of her kids in their matching Christmas sweaters. Mike sending a video of himself doing what he called his amusement park warm-up stretches. Even my normally reserved father had sent a message saying he was looking forward to spending quality time with his family. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it, but I responded to each message with the appropriate level of enthusiasm and excitement. The staff began arriving at 7:30, and I gathered them in the employee break room for a final briefing. There were 12 of them in total, all professionals I had hired specifically for this event. Security guards, ride operators, concession workers, and cleanup crew, each one carefully selected and thoroughly briefed on their role in what was about to unfold. They thought they were working a private family party with some unusual protocols, which was technically true, though they had no idea how unusual things were about to become. Marcus, the head of security, was a former police officer in his 50s who had spent the last decade working private events for wealthy families. He understood discretion and followed instructions without asking unnecessary questions, which made him perfect for what I needed. "Remember," I told him as we reviewed the security protocols one final time, "no one leaves the park without my express permission. No exceptions, no matter what they say or how urgent they claim it is." The ride operators were mostly college students looking to make extra money during winter break. They were enthusiastic and eager to please, which would make them ideal for maintaining the illusion that this was just another fun family gathering. The concession staff were professionals from a catering company that specialized in high-end private events, and they had been told that the Chen family was extremely particular about their service standards. What none of them knew was that I had spent the past month studying every aspect of my family's psychology, their fears, their triggers, and their weaknesses. I knew that Lisa was claustrophobic and terrified of being trapped in small spaces. I knew that Mike had developed a genuine phobia of heights after a construction accident 5 years ago. I knew that Jessica suffered from motion sickness and couldn't handle spinning rides. I knew that my mother had anxiety about being separated from her purse and always needed to know where the nearest restroom was located. Most importantly, I knew that all of them took my presence for granted to such a degree that they would probably spend the first hour of the party without even noticing I wasn't participating in the activities alongside them. They would assume I was handling logistics, managing details, making sure everything ran smoothly while they enjoyed themselves. It was the same assumption they had made countless times before, and it was going to be the foundation of their downfall. At 8:45, I positioned myself at the main entrance to welcome my family as they arrived. I had chosen my outfit carefully. A simple red sweater and dark jeans that would photograph well, but wouldn't draw attention away from the family members who would want to be the center of attention. My smile was genuine because for the first time in months, I was genuinely excited about spending time with my family. Not because I loved them, but because I was finally going to show them exactly how I had felt standing in that empty parking lot. Lisa arrived first with her husband David and their 3 children. 8-year-old Emma immediately ran toward the carousel, her eyes wide with excitement at having the entire park to themselves. 10-year-old Tommy was already planning his route through the roller coasters, and 6-year-old Sophie clung to her mother's hand while staring up at the towering Christmas tree that dominated the park's central plaza. "Sarah, this is incredible," Lisa gushed, pulling me into a hug that felt surprisingly warm considering what I knew was coming. "You've really outdone yourself this time." My parents arrived next, my mother immediately commenting on how lovely everything looked while my father started taking pictures with the expensive camera he had bought himself for his birthday. Mike and his wife Jennifer pulled up in their oversized SUV, their twin teenage boys already arguing about which rides they wanted to try first. Jessica arrived last, as always, making a grand entrance in her convertible even though it was December and barely 40 degrees outside. The gathering in the central plaza was exactly what I had expected. Excited chatter about the decorations, the perfect weather, and the incredible experience I had arranged for everyone. Multiple conversations happening simultaneously as people caught up with relatives they hadn't seen since Thanksgiving. Children running in circles around the Christmas tree, and adults pulling out their phones to document every moment of the exclusive family celebration. What struck me most was how naturally they all fell into their established roles. Lisa immediately began organizing group photos, positioning people according to some invisible hierarchy that placed her children front and center. Mike started telling exaggerated stories about his latest business ventures, while gesturing toward the rides as if he owned them. Jessica posed for selfies with different backdrops, clearly planning her social media strategy for maximum impact. My parents settled into their familiar roles as benevolent observers, smiling indulgently at their adult children and grandchildren, while making gentle suggestions about safety and moderation. And me? I faded into the background exactly as I always did, becoming the invisible organizer who made sure everyone had what they needed while drawing no attention to myself. The difference was that this time, my invisibility was strategic rather than accidental. This time, I was watching them with the cold calculation of a predator studying prey. The first hour proceeded exactly according to plan. The family dispersed throughout the park in predictable patterns, with the adults gravitating toward the gentler rides and the children immediately heading for the most exciting attractions. I moved among them like a ghost, checking on everyone's needs, suggesting new activities, and maintaining the fiction that this was just another wonderful family gathering organized by reliable, generous Sarah. The hot chocolate stand was a particular hit, with my mother declaring it the best she had ever tasted. The Christmas cookies shaped like carousel horses were perfect Instagram props for Jessica's carefully curated social media presence. The holiday music playing throughout the park created exactly the right atmosphere of family togetherness and seasonal joy. Everything was proceeding flawlessly, which meant it was time to begin phase 2 of my plan. I had timed everything to coincide with the moment when my family would be most relaxed and comfortable, when their guard would be completely down, and they would be fully absorbed in their own enjoyment. That moment came at exactly 10:30 in the morning, when everyone had settled into their preferred activities and the initial excitement of arrival had mellowed into comfortable familiarity. That's when I disappeared. Not dramatically or obviously, but gradually and naturally, the way I had been disappearing from their consciousness for years. I simply stopped being where they expected me to be. When Lisa looked around for someone to watch her purse while she took the children on the kiddie coaster, I wasn't there. When Mike wanted someone to take photos of him pretending to drive the antique fire truck, I was nowhere to be found. When my mother needed someone to hold her coat while she visited the restroom, I had somehow vanished. At first, none of them noticed. They were too absorbed in their own experiences to register that their usual support system had quietly removed itself from the equation. But gradually, as small needs arose and went unmet, as minor inconveniences accumulated without being smoothed away, they began to sense that something was different. The realization didn't hit them all at once. It crept in slowly, like cold water rising around their ankles. Lisa was the first to verbalize it, standing near the carousel at 11:15 with her children demanding to go on rides that required adult supervision, while her husband was off somewhere taking photographs. "Has anyone seen Sarah?" she called out to the general vicinity, her voice carrying just a hint of irritation. "I need someone to help me with the kids." But I wasn't there to help her with the kids. I was in my office, watching everything unfold through the security cameras I had installed throughout the park. Every conversation, every moment of growing confusion, every gradual realization that their dependable support system had somehow malfunctioned. The cameras were positioned perfectly to capture their faces as the situation slowly dawned on them. Mike was the next to notice my absence when he couldn't find anyone to operate the vintage carousel for his children. The ride required a staff member to start and stop it safely, but the teenage operator I had assigned to that section had been given very specific instructions about when he was and wasn't available to help. "Where the hell is Sarah?" Mike muttered, checking his phone for messages that weren't there. "She organized this whole thing and now she's disappeared?" My mother's growing anxiety was particularly satisfying to observe. She had always been the type of person who needed constant reassurance and support, and my absence was creating a low-level panic that she couldn't quite articulate. She kept looking around expectantly, waiting for me to appear with solutions to problems she hadn't even fully identified yet. When Jessica asked her where I was, my mother's response was telling. "She's probably around somewhere, handling details. You know how Sarah is." But Sarah wasn't handling details. Sarah was sitting in a comfortable office chair, watching her family experience the first taste of what it felt like to be forgotten and left behind. The irony was delicious. After 34 years of being taken for granted, I was finally absent when they needed me most, and they were beginning to understand how much they had relied on my invisible labor. The first real crisis came at noon when little Sophie scraped her knee on the pavement near the bumper cars. It was a minor injury, the kind of childhood accident that happens at every family outing, but it was the type of situation where everyone automatically looked around for Sarah to handle it. Sarah would have the bandages, the antiseptic wipes, the soothing words and gentle touches that would turn tears into laughter within minutes. But Sarah wasn't there, and no one else had thought to bring a first aid kit. Lisa fumbled through her purse looking for tissues while Sophie's crying grew louder and more distressed. David tried to comfort his daughter with awkward pats on the head, clearly out of his depth when it came to managing childhood injuries. The other adults stood around offering unhelpful suggestions while a 6-year-old child sobbed over a skinned knee that could have been fixed in 30 seconds if I had been there to fix it. Finally, Jessica flagged down one of the park employees, who provided basic first aid from a station near the entrance. The incident was resolved without any real harm done, but the psychological impact was significant. For the first time in their lives, My family members had encountered a situation where they needed Sarah, and Sarah wasn't available to be needed. The complaints started small and grew larger as the day progressed. Lisa grumbling about having to watch her own children while her husband took photographs. Mike frustrated that no one was available to hold his jacket while he rode the roller coaster with his sons. Jessica annoyed that no one was taking pictures of her posed in front of various Christmas displays. My parents confused and slightly hurt that their usually attentive daughter seemed to have abandoned them to fend for themselves. By 1 o'clock, the mood of the family gathering had shifted noticeably. The initial excitement and gratitude had been replaced by a growing sense of irritation and entitlement. They had come to expect a certain level of service and support from these family events, and the absence of that support was making them cranky and demanding. They were like children, whose nanny had suddenly disappeared, leaving them to realize how much work went into making their lives comfortable. The lunch situation was particularly revealing. I had arranged for the concession stands to provide a wonderful spread of everyone's favorite foods, but I hadn't arranged for anyone to coordinate the meal or make sure everyone got what they wanted. The result was chaos. Different family members ordering different items at different times, no one taking responsibility for gathering everyone together, children wandering off with half-eaten hot dogs while adults argued about where to sit and who was paying for what. "This is ridiculous," Mike announced to no one in particular, as he stood in line at the pizza stand with his arms full of jackets and purses that belonged to other family members. "Where the hell is Sarah? She organized this whole thing and then just vanished. It's like she doesn't even care if we're having a good time." The lack of self-awareness in that statement was breathtaking. After leaving me stranded in an empty parking lot just 2 months earlier, Mike was now complaining that I wasn't sufficiently focused on ensuring his comfort and enjoyment. The man who had walked away from me without a second thought was now frustrated that I wasn't available to hold his jacket. But the real beauty of my plan was that they still hadn't figured out where I was or why I was absent. They kept expecting me to reappear at any moment with explanations and apologies, ready to resume my role as the family's invisible support system. The possibility that my absence might be intentional hadn't occurred to any of them because they couldn't conceive of a version of Sarah who would deliberately make their lives more difficult. At 2 o'clock, Lisa finally called my phone. I watched on the security monitor as she stood near the fountain in the center of the park, her face flushed with frustration and her 3 children whining about various wants and needs that weren't being immediately satisfied. The phone rang 6 times before going to voicemail, and I could see her jaw clench as she left a message that tried to sound casual, but came across as passive-aggressive. "Hey Sarah, it's Lisa. We're all having a great time, but we haven't seen you in a while, and the kids are asking where Aunt Sarah is. Give me a call when you get this message so we know where to find you. Thanks for organizing this amazing day, but we'd love to actually spend some time with you too." The message was perfect because it revealed everything about how my family viewed my role in their lives. Even when they were looking for me, even when they needed me, the focus was still on how my absence was affecting their experience rather than any genuine concern for my well-being. They wanted to find me so I could resume making their day easier, not because they missed my company or were worried about my safety. The second call came from my mother 20 minutes later. Her message was more direct and more revealing. "Sarah, honey, I don't know where you are, but we really need you to come help us figure out some things. Your father can't find the restroom, Lisa's children are getting cranky, and nobody knows how to work the carousel. This is supposed to be a family day, and it's not the same without you here to help coordinate everything." The third call was from Mike, and his tone was distinctly less patient. "Sarah, what the hell is going on? You invite us all to this private party and then disappear? This is really inconsiderate, and people are starting to get upset. You need to call me back right now and tell me where you are." The escalation in their tone and urgency was exactly what I had expected. They were moving through the stages of realization like clockwork. confusion, frustration, irritation, and finally, genuine anger. But still no awareness that their experience today might be connected to how they had treated me in the past. Still no recognition that being abandoned and forgotten might be exactly the lesson I intended them to learn. At 3 o'clock, I finally made my first appearance of the day. I emerged from the administrative building with a clipboard in my hand and an expression of professional concern on my face, playing the role of a park employee dealing with operational issues rather than a family member enjoying a celebration. Lisa spotted me first and practically ran across the plaza to confront me, her children trailing behind her like ducklings following their mother. "Sarah, where have you been? We've been looking everywhere for you." Her voice was pitched high, with relief and frustration, and I could see the other family members beginning to converge on our location as word spread that I had finally been found. "I'm so sorry," I said, consulting my clipboard with the serious expression of someone dealing with important business matters. "There have been some operational issues with the park systems today, and I've been in meetings with the management team trying to resolve them. You know how these things can be when you're dealing with old equipment and complex logistics." The explanation was perfectly reasonable and completely believable. Of course, there would be operational issues at an amusement park. Of course, the person who had organized the event would need to deal with those issues. Of course, Sarah would prioritize solving problems over enjoying herself, because that's what Sarah always did. But there was something different about my demeanor that I could see them struggling to identify. I was present but not fully present, helpful but not eager to please, available but somehow distant. I was playing my usual role but with a subtle detachment that they couldn't quite put their finger on. "Well, you're here now," Mike said, clearly relieved to have his support system back in place. "Can you help us figure out this carousel situation? The kids have been wanting to ride it all day, but we can't find anyone to operate it." "Of course," I said, making a note on my clipboard. "I'll see what I can do about getting someone assigned to that ride. In the meantime, there are plenty of other attractions available that don't require operator assistance." The response was helpful, but not immediate. I was offering to solve their problem, but not right now, not with the urgency and personal attention they had come to expect from me. They would have to wait, and they would have to find alternatives, and they would have to manage their own disappointment about not getting exactly what they wanted when they wanted it. Over the next hour, I maintained this same careful balance. Present but not available, helpful but not accommodating, visible but somehow untouchable. I responded to their requests and questions, but always with the professional distance of a service provider rather than the eager-to-please family member they were used to dealing with. The change in dynamic was subtle but significant, and I could see it affecting them in ways they couldn't articulate. They kept expecting me to slip back into my old patterns of behavior, to prioritize their comfort over everything else, to anticipate their needs before they had to ask. When I didn't, when I remained politely professional instead of personally invested, it created a low-level frustration that colored everything else about their experience. By 4 o'clock, the complaints were becoming more direct and more personal. Jessica cornered me near the hot chocolate stand to demand an explanation for what she called my weird behavior throughout the day. "You're acting really strange, Sarah. Like you're working here instead of celebrating with your family. Did something happen? Are you upset about something?" The question was almost laughably obtuse coming from someone who had been part of leaving me stranded in a parking lot just 2 months earlier, but I maintained my professional composure. "I just want to make sure everyone has a wonderful time," I said with a smile that didn't reach my eyes. Sometimes that means handling the logistics instead of participating in all the activities. "But that's not like you," Jessica insisted, her perfectly manicured brow furrowed with confusion. "Usually you're right there with us, taking pictures and organizing group activities and making sure everyone's having fun. Today you're like, I don't know, like you're managing us instead of hanging out with us." The observation was more, perceptive than I had given Jessica credit for, but she still couldn't connect the dots between my behavior today and their behavior 2 months ago. She could sense that something was different, but she couldn't identify what or why, and she certainly couldn't imagine that the change might be intentional. As the afternoon wore on, my family's frustration continued to build. They were getting tired and cranky, the children were becoming difficult to manage, and the absence of their usual support system was making every small problem feel larger and more overwhelming. But they still hadn't figured out that their experience today was a carefully orchestrated reflection of how they had made me feel when they left me behind. The beautiful irony was that they were surrounded by everything they loved about family gatherings: good food, fun activities, beautiful decorations, perfect weather. But they couldn't fully enjoy any of it because the person who usually made everything effortless was no longer making that effort. They were learning what it felt like when Sarah wasn't there to smooth every rough edge and solve every small problem. And the day was just getting started. The announcement came over the park's speaker system at exactly 5 o'clock, just as the winter sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the pathways, and my family was starting to look forward to the evening activities I had promised. My voice echoed from speakers hidden throughout Wonderland, clear and professional, carrying the kind of authority that comes from owning the place where people are standing. Good evening, Chen family members and guests. This is Sarah speaking, from the Park Management Office. I hope everyone has been enjoying their exclusive experience at Wonderland today. At this time, I need to inform you that due to technical difficulties with our gate systems, the park will be remaining closed to outside traffic for the remainder of the evening. All family members are requested to gather in the main pavilion for an important announcement regarding tonight's dinner arrangements and safety protocols. The reaction was immediate and varied. I watched through the security cameras as confusion spread across their faces like ripples in a pond. Lisa looked around frantically, trying to spot me among the holiday decorations and food stands. Mike pulled out his phone and started dialing my number, his face already showing the beginning signs of irritation. My parents moved slowly toward the pavilion, my mother clutching my father's arm with the kind of nervous energy that suggested she sensed something was wrong, but couldn't identify what. Jessica was the most dramatic in her response, throwing her hands up in theatrical exasperation and declaring to anyone within earshot that this was exactly the kind of thing that always happened when Sarah tried to organize complicated events. "I knew something like this would happen," she announced, her voice carrying across the plaza. "Sarah always bites off more than she can chew with these family things." The irony of that statement was particularly delicious, considering that Jessica had never organized a single family event in her entire life, preferring to show up late, contribute nothing, and then criticize whatever arrangements other people had made. But today, her usual pattern of behavior was about to be interrupted in ways she couldn't possibly anticipate. As my family members reluctantly made their way toward the main pavilion, I took one final look around my office to make sure everything was in order for what was about to unfold. The documents were organized in neat stacks on my desk. The video equipment was tested and ready. The security protocols were in place. Every detail had been planned and rehearsed because this moment was going to be the culmination of months of careful preparation. The pavilion was Wonderland's largest covered gathering area, with picnic tables arranged in rows and a small stage at one end that was typically used for children's entertainment shows. Holiday lights were strung from the ceiling beams, creating a warm and festive atmosphere that would make the contrast with what was coming even more striking. I had chosen this location specifically because it had only 2 exits, both of which were now being monitored by my security team. I watched from the back of the pavilion as my family members filed in, their conversations a mixture of confusion, irritation, and growing concern. They arranged themselves in their typical social clusters, my parents at a table near the front, Lisa's family spread across 2 tables with the children already starting to complain about being tired, Mike and his wife whispering to each other, with increasingly worried expressions, and Jessica taking selfies against the holiday decorations as if this were just another photo opportunity. The most telling aspect of their behavior was how they kept looking around for me to appear and explain what was happening. Even when they were frustrated with me, even when they were criticizing my organizational skills, they still expected me to materialize and take care of whatever problems had arisen. The idea that I might not be coming to fix things for them hadn't occurred to anyone. I let them wait for exactly 10 minutes, long enough for their conversations to shift from confused to concerned to genuinely worried, long enough for my mother to start asking my father if he thought something might be seriously wrong, long enough for Mike to leave increasingly angry voicemails on my phone, long enough for Lisa to start making contingency plans about how they were going to get home if the gate problems couldn't be resolved. Then I walked onto the stage. The effect was immediate and electric. Relief flooded their faces as their familiar support system finally appeared to take control of the situation. Several people started talking at once, calling out questions, and complaints and demands for explanations. But something in my posture and expression made them gradually fall silent. I stood at the microphone with the same professional composure I had maintained all day, but there was something different about my energy that even they could sense. "Thank you all for gathering here tonight," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the pavilion's sound system. "I know there's been some confusion about the technical difficulties and schedule changes, and I appreciate your patience while I've been working to resolve the various issues that have come up throughout the day." Lisa raised her hand like she was in a classroom, clearly bursting with questions and complaints that she needed to voice immediately. "Sarah, can you just tell us what's going on? The kids are getting tired and we need to know if we're going to be able to leave soon. Some of us have work tomorrow and we can't stay here all night." The interruption was so perfectly timed and so perfectly characteristic of Lisa's self-centered approach to family situations that I almost smiled. She had managed to express concern for herself, make demands about timing, and completely ignore the possibility that there might be larger issues at play, all in the span of 30 seconds. "I'm getting to that, Lisa," I said calmly. "But first, I think it would be helpful for everyone to understand exactly what kind of day we've all had here at Wonderland. From my perspective, it's been quite educational." The word educational hung in the air with a weight that made several family members shift uncomfortably in their seats. My mother leaned forward with a worried expression, clearly sensing that something important was about to happen but unable to predict what it might be. "For example," I continued, consulting a tablet that I had brought with me to the stage, "I've learned that when Lisa needs someone to watch her children, she automatically looks around for me without considering that I might be busy with other responsibilities. When Mike needs someone to hold his jacket or take his photograph, he assumes I'm available to provide that service. When Jessica wants someone to document her fun day on social media, she expects me to be standing by with a camera ready." The pavilion was completely silent now, with the kind of heavy quiet that precedes either an explosion or a revelation. My family members were staring at me with expressions that ranged from confusion to growing alarm, clearly sensing that this wasn't going to be the straightforward explanation they had been expecting. "Most importantly," I said, my voice gaining strength and clarity with each word, "I've learned that when I'm not available to provide those services, when I'm not standing by ready to solve problems and smooth over difficulties, my family becomes frustrated and angry, not worried about my well-being, not concerned about why I might be absent, but angry that their support system isn't functioning properly." Mike stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the pavilion floor with a harsh sound that made several people jump. "Sarah, what the hell is this about? We're grateful for everything you've done today, but you're acting really strange, and frankly, you're starting to scare people. Can you just tell us what's wrong with the gates so we can figure out how to get home?" The question was so loaded with assumptions and entitlement that I had to pause for a moment to appreciate its perfect awfulness. Mike was simultaneously acknowledging that I had done everything for them, while demanding that I continue doing everything for them, all while expressing irritation that I wasn't handling the situation in the way he preferred. "There's nothing wrong with the gates, Mike," I said, letting that information sink in for a moment before continuing. The park's security systems are functioning perfectly. No one is trapped here due to technical difficulties. The silence that followed was different from the previous quiet moments. This was the silence of people beginning to realize that they had fundamentally misunderstood the situation they were in. I could see wheels turning in their heads as they processed the implications of what I had just told them. Jessica was the first to voice what they were all beginning to think. "What do you mean there's nothing wrong with the gates? You said over the speaker that there were technical difficulties. Are you saying you lied to us?" "I said there were technical difficulties that would prevent the park from opening to outside traffic," I corrected. "That's completely accurate. The technical difficulty is that I don't want the park to open to outside traffic tonight." The revelation hit them in waves. First came the confusion as they tried to understand what I was saying. Then came the realization that their situation was not what they had thought it was. Finally came the beginning of real fear as they started to grasp that they were not in control of when they would be leaving. My father, who had been sitting quietly throughout the exchange, finally spoke up with the kind of gentle authority he had always used when he thought family conflicts were getting out of hand. "Sarah, sweetheart, I think there might be some kind of misunderstanding here. Why don't you come down from the stage and we can all talk about this together like a family?" The suggestion was so perfectly representative of my father's approach to difficult situations that I felt a genuine pang of sadness. He truly believed that family problems could always be resolved through calm conversation and mutual understanding. He had no idea that some family problems were the result of decades of accumulated damage that couldn't be fixed with a heart-to-heart talk. "I think the misunderstanding, Dad, is about what kind of family we actually are," I replied. "And I think it's time we all got clear about that." I pressed a button on my tablet, and the large screen that was typically used for children's entertainment programs descended from the ceiling behind me. The first image that appeared was a photograph of all of us from earlier in the day, taken by one of the security cameras I had positioned throughout the park. It showed my family enjoying the carousel, laughing and taking pictures and having a wonderful time. What it didn't show was me, because I hadn't been there. "This photo was taken at 11:30 this morning," I explained. "As you can see, everyone looks like they're having a great time. Can anyone tell me what's missing from this picture?" The question was rhetorical, but Lisa answered it anyway with growing irritation in her voice. "Sarah, we know you weren't in the photo because you were handling park business. You already explained that. What's your point?" "My point, Lisa, is that none of you noticed I was missing until you needed something from me. For 3.5 hours, your sister and daughter was nowhere to be found, and it didn't occur to any of you to wonder where I was or whether I was okay. You only started looking for me when you realized your support system wasn't functioning." The next image on the screen was a compilation of security camera footage showing each family member at the moment they realized they needed me for something. Lisa looking around frantically when her children wanted to ride the carousel. Mike frustrated that no one was available to take his photo. Jessica annoyed that no one was helping coordinate group activities. My mother confused about why her usual backup wasn't materializing to solve small problems. "What you're seeing here," I continued, "is a pattern that has defined our family relationships for as long as I can remember. I exist to make your lives easier and more enjoyable. When I'm fulfilling that function, you barely notice me. When I'm not fulfilling that function, you become frustrated and demanding." The pavilion was completely silent, except for the sound of children fidgeting in their seats and the distant Christmas music still playing throughout the park. My family members stared at the screen with expressions of growing discomfort as they watched themselves display exactly the behaviors I was describing. The next series of images showed scenes from our family history. Birthday parties where I was behind the camera instead of in the photos, holiday gatherings where I was in the kitchen instead of at the table, family trips where I was organizing, logistics instead of creating memories. Years and years of documentation showing the same pattern of me being present but invisible, essential but unappreciated. The thing about being taken for granted, I said, my voice carrying easily through the pavilion's sound system, is that it becomes so normal that people stop seeing it as a choice. You've all gotten so used to me organizing your events, paying for your activities, and solving your problems that you've started to think it's just the natural order of things. Like I was born to be your family servant. My mother finally found her voice, though it came out shaky and uncertain. Sarah, honey, that's not fair. We've never thought of you as a servant. You're our daughter and sister, and we love you very much. If you've been feeling unappreciated, we can talk about that. But this isn't the way to handle it. The response was so perfectly crafted to avoid taking any real responsibility that I had to admire its unconscious artistry. She managed to acknowledge my feelings while dismissing them, offer to address the problem while suggesting that my method of addressing it was inappropriate, and express love while completely missing the point about how that love had been demonstrated over the years. You're right that this isn't the usual way to handle family conflicts, I agreed. Usually, I would swallow my hurt feelings, accept your apologies, and go back to being your reliable support system. But I'm not going to do that anymore, because I've learned something important about our family dynamics. I pressed another button on my tablet, and the screen changed to show a single date, October 15th. Below the date was a photograph of an empty parking lot taken from a security camera at Wonderland. The image hit them like a physical blow. I could see recognition dawn on their faces as they remembered what had happened on that date, what they had done on that date, and why that parking lot was significant to our family history. Does anyone remember what happened on October 15th? I asked, though I could see from their expressions that they all remembered perfectly. That was the day we came to Wonderland for our annual family reunion. The day that you all had such a wonderful time that you completely forgot I existed. Lisa was shaking her head before I even finished speaking, clearly preparing to offer the same dismissive explanations they had all used at the time. Sarah, that was an accident. We've all apologized for that. We thought you were riding with someone else. It was just a misunderstanding. It was an accident that revealed the truth about how this family operates, I corrected. When you were ready to leave, you all got in your cars and drove away without doing a basic head count to make sure everyone was accounted for. You were so accustomed to me being invisible that you literally forgot I existed. The next image on the screen was a timestamp showing 9:47 p.m., followed by security footage of me standing alone in the empty parking lot, soaking wet from the rain that had started after the park closed. The image was devastating in its starkness. A woman in a simple dress, clutching her purse, staring at the empty spaces where her family's cars had been parked. This is what I looked like when I realized that the people I had spent 34 years loving and supporting had driven away and left me behind like a piece of forgotten luggage, I said. Not because you're evil people, but because you're so used to me being unimportant that my absence didn't register as anything worth noticing. The pavilion was so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. My family members sat frozen in their seats, staring at the screen with expressions of shame and growing understanding. For the first time in my life, they were truly seeing me, truly comprehending the impact of their casual disregard. But I wasn't finished. This was just the setup for what was really coming. The beautiful thing about that night, I continued, was that it clarified something I had been wondering about for years. I had always assumed that despite the way you treated me, you would eventually notice if I was gone. I thought that somewhere, underneath all the taking for granted and casual dismissal, there was genuine love and concern that would kick in if I was actually in danger. I paused to let that statement sink in before delivering the next blow. But when I didn't answer my phone that night, when I didn't respond to your texts, when I was completely unreachable for hours after you had abandoned me in an empty parking lot, none of you came back to check on me. None of you called the police. None of you seemed to consider the possibility that something might have happened to the family member you had forgotten. The truth of that statement was written across their faces in expressions of growing horror and shame. They were remembering that night from their own perspectives, remembering how they had discovered I wasn't with them, remembering their casual assumption that I would figure out my own way home. Mike sent me a text asking if I had gotten home. Safely, I continued. Lisa left a voicemail saying she hoped I wasn't too upset about the mix-up. Jessica posted on Facebook about what a fun day we'd all had together. But none of you came back for me. None of you treated my absence as an emergency that required immediate action. My mother was crying now, quiet tears that rolled down her cheeks as she finally understood the full scope of what they had done and what it had revealed about their family dynamics. My father sat beside her with his head in his hands, looking older than I had ever seen him. That night taught me that I needed to face some uncomfortable truths about the people I love most in the world, I said. And the most uncomfortable truth was that you don't actually love me the way I love you. You love what I do for you. You love how I make your lives easier and more convenient. But you don't love me enough to notice when I'm gone. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fire that was just beginning to spread. I could see them struggling with it, trying to find ways to deny it or explain it away, but the evidence was too overwhelming and too recent for them to dismiss. Jessica finally found her voice, though it came out high and defensive. That's not true, Sarah. We do love you. We were wrong that night and we're sorry, but that doesn't mean we don't care about you. You're being really unfair right now. Am I? I asked, pressing another button on my tablet. Let's test that theory. The screen changed to show a live feed from the park's main entrance, where my family members could see their cars parked in the visitor lot. But there was something different about the scene that took them a moment to process. The parking lot was surrounded by security barriers that definitely hadn't been there when they arrived that morning. Orange cones and metal barricades created a clear perimeter around the entire area, and security guards in reflective vests were positioned at strategic points throughout the lot. Those are your cars, I explained helpfully, and those are the security measures I put in place this afternoon to ensure that no one leaves Wonderland tonight without my permission. The implications of what they were seeing hit them like a series of physical blows. First came the realization that their vehicles were inaccessible. Then came the understanding that this had been planned in advance. Finally came the dawning comprehension that they were, in every practical sense, trapped. Mike was on his feet again, his face flushed with anger and what looked like the beginning of real panic. Sarah, this is insane. You can't keep us here, against our will. This is kidnapping or false imprisonment or something. You could go to jail for this. Could I? I asked with genuine curiosity. You're my invited guests at a private party on property that I own. I haven't threatened anyone or used physical force to prevent you from leaving. I've simply made it clear that transportation won't be available until I'm ready to provide it. The legal distinction was important, and I could see my family members struggling to understand whether what I was doing was actually illegal or just deeply unethical. The uncertainty added another layer of anxiety to their growing panic. Besides, I continued, I thought it would be educational for all of you to experience what it feels like to be stranded somewhere with no way to get home. You know, like I experienced in this very parking lot 2 months ago. The parallel was so obvious and so deliberate that even my most obtuse family members couldn't miss it. I was giving them a taste of their own medicine, forcing them to experience a controlled version of what they had put me through when they forgot I existed. Lisa was hyperventilating now, her claustrophobia clearly triggered by the realization that she couldn't leave when she wanted to. Sarah, please, this isn't funny anymore. The kids need to get home and I have work tomorrow. You've made your point about October, and we're all very sorry about that, but you can't punish us like this. Punish you? I repeated, as if the idea had never occurred to me. Lisa, I'm not punishing anyone. I'm providing you with the same level of consideration and concern that you provided me 2 months ago. I'm treating you exactly the way you treated me. The equation was perfect and undeniable. They had left me stranded without transportation or communication, so I was leaving them stranded without transportation or communication. They had dismissed my distress as unimportant, so I was dismissing their distress as unimportant. They had assumed I would figure out my own way home, so I was assuming they would figure out their own way to cope with the situation. The only difference, I added, is that you're stranded somewhere warm and comfortable with food and entertainment available, whereas I was stranded in an empty parking lot in the rain with nothing but the clothes on my back. My father finally looked up from his hands, his voice heavy with a defeat I had never heard from him before. Sarah, what do you want from us? What do we need to do to make this right? The question was exactly what I had been waiting for, but not for the reasons he thought. He was asking what he could do to fix the immediate situation, to get back to the comfortable family dynamics where I absorbed all the emotional labor and they enjoyed all the benefits. He still didn't understand that those dynamics were what needed to change. I want you to understand something, Dad, I said gently. This isn't about making things right. This is about making things clear. For 34 years, I've been showing you who I am through my actions, and you've been showing me who you are through yours. Tonight, I'm just making sure we're all being honest about what those actions have revealed. I pressed the final button on my tablet, and the screen behind me went dark. The pavilion's overhead lights dimmed slightly, creating a more intimate atmosphere that would be perfect for the conversations that were about to unfold. So now we're going to have a real family discussion, I announced. The kind we should have had years ago, before things got to this point. We're going to talk about what it means to be a family, and what obligations family members have to each other, and what happens when those obligations aren't met. The transition from revelation to confrontation was seamless and inevitable. They had seen the evidence of their behavior. They understood the consequences of their actions, and now they were going to have to account for both. The real reckoning was just beginning. The silence that followed my announcement was thick with tension and disbelief. My family sat frozen in their seats, processing the reality that their evening had taken a turn they never could have anticipated. The warm glow of the Christmas lights suddenly felt less festive and more like stage lighting for a performance none of them had auditioned for. I walked down from the stage slowly, deliberately, letting each step echo through the pavilion. The sound of my heels against the wooden floor seemed amplified in the quiet space, creating a rhythm that matched the steady beat of my heart. For the first time in my life, I was the center of my family's complete attention, and the power of that moment was intoxicating. Let's start with you, Lisa, I said, settling into a chair at the table directly in front of where my sister sat, with her family. Since you seem to be the most upset about the transportation situation, why don't you tell me about the last time you offered to give me a ride somewhere? Lisa's mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. Her children sat on either side of her, sensing the tension in the air but not understanding what was happening. Her husband David had gone pale and was staring at his hands folded on the table. I don't understand what you're asking, Lisa finally managed. We live in different parts of town. When would I need to give you a ride? When my car was in the shop last March and I needed to get to Mom's birthday dinner, I said calmly. When I called you and asked if I could catch a ride with your family, what did you tell me? The memory was clearly uncomfortable for Lisa, and she shifted in her seat before answering. I said we didn't have room because the kids had so much stuff with them, but you figured it out, didn't you? You took an Uber or something. I took 3 buses and walked 6 blocks in the rain, I corrected. The Uber was $60, which I couldn't afford that week because I had just lent Mike $800 for his car payment. But you're right that I figured it out. I always figure it out, don't I? The pattern was becoming clear even to Lisa. and I could see the discomfort growing in her expression. She was beginning to understand that this wasn't just about one incident, but about a lifetime of small cruelties and casual dismissals that had accumulated into something much larger. When your water heater broke last summer, I continued, who came over at 7 a.m. to help you move everything out of your basement before the repair crew arrived? You did, Lisa whispered. And when I needed help moving into my new apartment 3 months later, how many family members showed up to help me? The answer hung in the air between us because we both knew it. 0. Not a single family member had been available to help me move, despite the fact that I had helped all of them with various moves and home repairs over the years. But when you needed someone to watch Emma, Tommy, and Sophie while you and David went to that wedding in Chicago, who dropped everything to spend the weekend with your children? You did, Lisa said again, her voice even quieter. And when? I asked if you could return the favor and watch my neighbor's cat while I went to that conference in Seattle. What did you say? Lisa's face was bright red now, and tears were starting to form in her eyes. I said I was too busy with the kids' schedules. The asymmetry of our relationship was laid bare in that exchange. I gave freely and constantly, while she took freely and constantly. But when the dynamic was reversed even slightly, she always had reasons why she couldn't reciprocate. It was a pattern that defined not just our relationship, but my relationship with every person sitting in that pavilion. Your turn, Mike, I said, shifting my attention to my brother, who had been sitting quietly, probably hoping I would forget about him if he stayed still enough. Mike straightened in his chair and tried to summon some of his usual bluster. Look, Sarah, I know you're upset about something, but this is really getting out of hand. We're family, and families work through their problems by talking, not by trapping each other in amusement parks. You're absolutely right that families should work through their problems by talking, I agreed. So let's talk about money, since that's been such a significant part of our family dynamic over the years. I pulled out a folder that I had brought with me from the office, filled with documents that I had been preparing for months. Bank statements, canceled checks, loan agreements, and detailed records of every financial transaction between my family, members, and me going back 10 years. According to my records, I said, opening the folder and consulting the top page, you have borrowed a total of $47,000 from me over the past decade. Car payments, rent money, credit card debt, medical bills, and various emergency expenses that you couldn't cover. Mike's face went white as I read through the list. His wife, Jennifer, looked at him with an expression of shock and growing anger, clearly realizing that she had never been told about the full extent of her husband's financial dependence on his sister. Now, Mike, can you tell me how much of that money you've paid back? The question hung in the air while Mike struggled to find an answer that wouldn't make him look like exactly what he was. A man who had spent years taking advantage of his sister's generosity while contributing nothing in return. I've been meaning to start paying you back, he said weakly. Things have been tight, but I'm planning to get caught up on all that stuff soon. You've been planning to get caught up for 10 years, I said. But somehow you always manage to find money for new trucks, fishing trips, and season tickets to the baseball games. Somehow you always have funds available for the things you want, but never for the debts you owe to your sister. Jennifer was staring at her husband with an expression of growing horror. It was clear that she was learning about his financial irresponsibility at the same time as everyone else, and she was not pleased with what she was discovering. But the most interesting thing about our financial relationship, I continued, isn't how much you've borrowed from me. It's what happened the one time I asked to borrow money from you. Mike's expression suggested that he remembered exactly what I was referring to, and he clearly didn't want me to share that story with the rest of the family. When I needed $3,000 to cover the down payment for Mom's assisted living facility because I couldn't access my investment accounts quickly enough, what did you tell me? The silence stretched uncomfortably before Mike finally answered in a voice barely above a whisper. I said I couldn't help because we were saving for our vacation. Your vacation to Hawaii, I clarified. The $15,000 vacation to Hawaii that you took 2 weeks later, posting photos on Facebook of your luxury resort while Mom had to wait an extra month to move into the facility that would provide her with the care she needed. The cruelty of that contrast was stark and undeniable. Mike had refused to help his mother access necessary care because he didn't want to dip into his vacation fund, while I had spent years supporting him financially whenever he faced any kind of difficulty. But you figured it out, Mike said, trying to use Lisa's earlier deflection. Mom got into the facility eventually. I figured it out by selling my car and taking public transportation for 6 months, I said. I figured it out by working extra, freelance projects and sleeping 4 hours a night for weeks. I figured it out by sacrificing my own comfort and stability so that our mother could get the care she needed, while you were getting a tan on a beach in Maui. The weight of his selfishness was finally settling on Mike's shoulders, and I could see him struggling under the burden of understanding what kind of person his actions revealed him to be. Now let's talk about you, Jessica, I said, turning to my youngest sister who had been trying to make herself as small as possible in her chair. Jessica had always been the family princess, the baby who had grown into an adult without ever learning to take responsibility for herself or consider the needs of others. She was 30 years old and had never organized a family gathering, never contributed to a group gift, and never offered to help with any of the logistics that went into maintaining family relationships. I'm curious about your perspective on family obligations, I said. Do you think family members should support each other through difficult times? Of course I do, Jessica said quickly, probably sensing that this was some kind of test where the wrong answer would have consequences. Good, I said. Then you'll be able to explain why you've never once offered to help with Mom and Dad's care coordination, despite the fact that I've been managing their medical appointments, prescription refills, and insurance paperwork for the past 3 years. Jessica's perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the flush of shame that spread across her face. She had no explanation for her absence from one of the most important family responsibilities, because there was no explanation beyond pure selfishness. I don't know anything about medical stuff, she said weakly. I wouldn't know how to help with that kind of thing. You're a college graduate with a successful career in marketing, I pointed out. You manage complex projects and coordinate multiple stakeholders in your professional life. Are you really telling me that you lack the basic competence to make phone calls and keep track of appointments for your own parents? The excuse crumbled under even minimal scrutiny, revealing it for what it was, a convenient rationalization for avoiding unpleasant responsibilities. But you've been very helpful. In other ways, I continued with mock sincerity. Like when you volunteered to host last year's Christmas dinner and then changed your mind 3 days before the holiday because you decided you wanted to travel instead. The memory was clearly uncomfortable for Jessica, and she looked around the pavilion as if hoping someone would come to her rescue. But every family member was dealing with their own reckoning, and no one had energy left to defend her choices. I offered to bring dessert to wherever else we were having it, Jessica protested. You offered to bring store-bought cookies to the dinner that I ended up organizing and hosting at my apartment with 12 hours notice, I corrected. The dinner where I spent my Christmas Eve shopping, cooking, and preparing my home for 14 people because you decided your vacation was more important than your family commitments. The pattern was identical to what I had documented with Lisa and Mike. Jessica took freely from the family support system while contributing virtually nothing in return, always finding reasons why her circumstances prevented her from reciprocating the care and effort that others provided. And speaking of vacations, I said, consulting my folder again, how many family events have you missed because of travel plans that you made without checking the family calendar? Jessica's silence was answer enough. She had missed birthday, parties, anniversaries, graduations, and holiday celebrations because she consistently prioritized her social life over her family obligations. But somehow, I continued, When you needed a place to stay for 3 weeks while your apartment was being fumigated? Which family member opened their home to you without hesitation? You did, Jessica whispered, finally beginning to understand the scope of the imbalance in our relationships. And when you needed someone to co-sign your car loan because your credit wasn't good enough, who put their financial reputation on the line for you? You did. And when you wanted to impress your friends by hosting a dinner party but didn't know how to cook for a large group, who spent 2 days teaching you recipes and helping you plan the menu? You did. The repetition was hypnotic and damning. Over and over again, the same pattern emerged. Sarah giving, Sarah helping, Sarah sacrificing her own needs to meet the needs of others, while receiving virtually nothing in return except the assumption that her generosity would continue indefinitely. Now let's talk about you two, I said, shifting my attention to my parents who had been sitting in stunned silence throughout these revelations. My mother and father exchanged glances that were heavy with the weight of understanding. They were beginning to realize that they had raised children who took their sister for granted, and worse, that they had participated in and enabled that dynamic for decades. Mom, Dad, I want you to think carefully about this question, I said. In the past 5 years, how many times have you called me just to see how I was doing, without needing anything from me? The question clearly caught them off guard, and I could see them mentally scrolling through their recent interactions with me, trying to identify conversations that hadn't been centered around requests or logistics. Sweetheart, we talk all the time, my mother said uncertainly. We do talk all the time, I agreed. But when you call me, what are those conversations usually about? The silence that followed was telling. My parents were realizing that their interactions with me were almost exclusively transactional. They called when they needed help with technology, when they wanted me to coordinate family events, when they needed assistance with paperwork or appointments, or any of the countless tasks that came with aging. When's the last time either of you asked about my job, my interests, my goals, or my happiness? I pressed. When's the last time you inquired about my life in a way that suggested you see me as a complete person, rather than just a resource for solving your problems? My father's voice was heavy with dawning realization when he finally spoke. Sarah, I don't think we've never thought about it that way. I know you haven't, I said gently. That's exactly the problem. You've never thought about it, because you've never had to think about it. I've always been there, always been available, always been willing to help with whatever you needed, so you stopped seeing me as someone who might have needs of her own. The accusation was gentle, but devastating. My parents were good people who loved their children, but they had fallen into patterns of behavior that were ultimately harmful and dehumanizing. They had reduced me to my function in their lives, forgetting that I was a person with my own dreams, struggles, and emotional needs. But the most revealing thing about our family dynamic, I continued, isn't how you've treated me when I was available to help you. It's how you've treated me on the rare occasions when I haven't been available. I pulled out another document from my folder. This one a timeline I had created documenting every occasion over the past 5 years when I had been unable to immediately fulfill a family request or obligation. When I couldn't make it to Tommy's baseball game because I had food poisoning, what was your reaction, Lisa? Lisa shifted uncomfortably before answering. I was disappointed. I said something about how you always missed the important stuff. When I couldn't help Mike move his furniture because I was dealing with my landlord trying to illegally evict me, what did you say, Mike? Mike's voice was barely audible. I said it was typical that you would bail on family when we needed you most. When I couldn't host Christmas dinner because I was in the hospital with pneumonia, what happened, Jessica? Jessica was crying now, understanding where this was leading. We canceled Christmas dinner that year instead of someone else organizing it. And when I couldn't drive you to your doctor's appointment because my car wouldn't start and I couldn't afford the repair, what did you say, Mom? My mother's voice was thick with shame. I said I was disappointed that you hadn't planned better for emergencies. The pattern was clear and heartbreaking. Every time I had been unable to meet their expectations, every time I had shown any sign of human limitation or vulnerability, they had responded with criticism and disappointment rather than understanding and support. They had trained themselves to see my availability as a right rather than a gift. What none of you seem to understand, I said, is that I am not a service provider. I am not a resource to be utilized. I am not a support system that exists purely for your benefit. I am a person with my own life, my own challenges, and my own needs. The weight of that statement settled over the pavilion like a heavy blanket. For the first time in their lives, my family members were being forced to see me as something other than the reliable, invisible support system they had always taken for granted. But here's what's really interesting, I continued, standing up and beginning to pace around the pavilion. When I started pulling back from my usual level of support and involvement, when I stopped being instantly available for every request and obligation, you didn't respond by becoming more self-sufficient or by redistributing responsibilities among yourselves. I paused my pacing to look directly at each family member in turn. You responded by becoming angry with me for changing the rules of our relationship without consulting you first. You felt entitled to my continued support, and you interpreted any reduction in that support as a betrayal of my family obligations. The accuracy of that observation was written across their faces, in expressions of uncomfortable recognition. They had indeed felt betrayed when I had started setting boundaries, when I had begun saying no to requests that I had previously fulfilled without question. The problem, I said, settling back into my chair, is that you never asked me if I wanted to be the family's designated problem solver. You never checked to see if I was comfortable with the role you assigned to me. You just assumed that because I was willing to help, I was obligated to help, and that because I was good at organizing and managing things, I should be responsible for organizing and managing everything. The pavilion was completely silent, except for the distant sound of Christmas music still playing throughout the park. My family members sat in their chairs like defendants waiting for a verdict, finally understanding the scope of what they had done and what it had cost me. So, now we come to the real question, I said, pulling out the final document from my folder. What happens next? The paper I placed on the table was a detailed breakdown of everything I had contributed to my family over the past decade. Money loaned and never repaid, time spent on their projects and priorities, emotional energy invested in their problems and celebrations, opportunities I had sacrificed to meet their needs. This, I said, tapping the document, is what our family relationship has cost me. Not just in dollars, though that's significant, but in time, energy, and opportunities that I can never get back. The numbers were staggering even to me, and I had been the one accumulating them over the years. Hundreds of thousands of dollars in direct financial support, thousands of hours of unpaid labor, countless personal sacrifices made to prioritize their needs over my own. The question, I continued, is whether you think this has been a fair and sustainable arrangement. No one answered, because the answer was obvious and deeply uncomfortable. Our family dynamic had been profoundly unfair, with me carrying a disproportionate burden while receiving virtually no support in return. The question, I said, is whether you want to continue this arrangement, knowing what it actually costs and what it has cost me. The silence stretched between us like an ocean, vast and deep and filled with all the conversations we should have had years ago. And the question, I concluded, is what you're willing to do to repair the damage that has been done to our relationships by decades of taking my love and support for granted. The reckoning was complete. The evidence had been presented, the patterns had been exposed, and the cost had been calculated. Now it was time to see whether my family was capable of genuine change, or whether they would simply wait for this crisis to pass so they could return to the comfortable dynamics that had served them so well for so long. The children had fallen, asleep in their chairs, exhausted by the late hour and the tension they couldn't fully understand. The adults sat in contemplative silence, processing revelations that challenged everything they thought they knew about their family and their place within it. Outside the pavilion, Wonderland waited in perfect stillness, its rides and attractions standing like silent witnesses to a confrontation that had been decades in the making. The Christmas lights continued to twinkle in the darkness, beautiful and festive and completely at odds with the heavy emotional work being done beneath their cheerful glow. This was the moment I had been building toward since that night in October when they left me standing alone in an empty parking lot. This was the conversation we should have had years ago, before the resentment had calcified into something harder and more permanent. This was the reckoning that had always been inevitable, postponed by my willingness to absorb abuse and their comfort with providing it. Now there was nowhere to hide from the truth about who we really were as a family, and no way to pretend that love without reciprocity was sustainable or healthy. The question was whether they had the courage and commitment to do the hard work of building something better from the ruins of what we had been. The night was far from over, and the most difficult conversations were still ahead of us. The first crack in the silence came from an unexpected source. Emma, Lisa's 8-year-old daughter, stirred in her sleep and whispered, "Mommy, when are we going home?" The innocent question cut through the heavy atmosphere like a knife, reminding everyone that this confrontation was happening in front of children who would carry the memory of this night with them for the rest of their lives. Lisa's face crumpled as she looked at her sleeping daughter, and for the first time since this whole evening began, I saw something that looked like genuine remorse rather than defensive anger. "Sarah," she said quietly, "whatever we've done wrong, whatever we need to fix, please don't make the children suffer for it. They don't understand what's happening, and they just want to go home and sleep in their own beds." The plea was calculated but not entirely manipulative. Lisa was genuinely concerned about her children, even if she was also trying to use that concern as leverage to end a situation that had become unbearable for her. But her words revealed something important about how she viewed this confrontation, as something being done to them rather than something they had brought upon themselves. "You're right that the children don't understand what's happening," I agreed. "Just like I didn't understand what was happening when I was a child, and everyone in this family was training me to believe that my value was determined by how useful I could be to other people." I walked over to where Emma was sleeping and gently adjusted the jacket that someone had draped over her shoulders. The gesture was tender and protective, and I could see my family members struggling to reconcile the caring person they were witnessing with the vengeful captor they thought I had become. "The difference," I continued, "is that these children have parents who love them enough to advocate for their needs and protect them from uncomfortable situations. I had parents who loved me enough to expect me to handle uncomfortable situations so that everyone else could avoid them." My mother made a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a gasp, finally understanding that her parenting choices had contributed to the dynamic I was describing. She had raised me to be self-sufficient and responsible, which were admirable qualities, but she had also raised my siblings to expect that someone else would handle the difficult aspects of life for them. "You want to know when you're going home?" I asked, addressing Lisa's question directly. "You're going home when we finish the conversation we should have had 20 years ago. You're going home when you demonstrate that you understand what I've been trying to tell you tonight. You're going home when you prove that this family is capable of something better than what we've been." The conditional nature of their release was clear, and I could see them beginning to understand that I wasn't just having a dramatic moment that would blow over if they waited it out. This was a fundamental restructuring of our family relationships, and they were going to have to participate in that restructuring whether they wanted to or not. "So let's start with some practical questions," I said, returning to my seat and pulling out a notebook that I had brought from the office. "Mike, you owe me $47,000. How do you plan to pay that back? Mike's face went through several color changes before he managed to answer. Sarah, you know I don't have that kind of money just sitting around. My finances are tight, and Jennifer doesn't even work full-time because of the boys' schedules. That's interesting, I said, making a note in my notebook. So when you borrowed money from me, you had a plan for paying it back, but now that I'm asking for it, you don't have the resources to honor your obligations? The logical inconsistency was obvious even to Mike, and he struggled to find a response. That didn't make him sound like either a liar or a fool. The truth was that he had never intended to pay the money back, because he had always assumed that I would never actually ask for it. I'll set up a payment plan, he said finally. I can probably manage $200 or $300 a month once we get caught up on some other things. $200 a month, I calculated aloud, would mean you'd have the debt paid off in about 20 years, assuming no interest. Does that seem reasonable to you? The timeline was ridiculous, and we both knew it. By the time Mike finished paying me back, I would be in my 50s and he would be approaching retirement. It was the kind of payment plan that was designed to be so slow that everyone would eventually forget about it. What if we made it $500 a month? Mike offered, clearly desperate to find a number that would satisfy me without actually creating any significant hardship for him. What if you sold your boat? I countered. The suggestion hit Mike like a physical blow. His boat was his pride and joy, the symbol of his success and the center of his recreational life. It was also worth approximately $30,000, which would cover the majority of what he owed me. Sarah, that's not fair, he protested. That boat is important to me. I've worked hard for the things I have, and I shouldn't have to give them up just because you're upset about money I borrowed years ago. You worked hard for the things you have, I repeated slowly. Mike, you borrowed money from me to make the down payment on that boat. You literally used my money to buy the toy that you're now saying you shouldn't have to give up to pay me back. The revelation was devastating in its simplicity. Mike hadn't just borrowed money for necessities or emergencies. He had borrowed money to fund his lifestyle and entertainment, always with the assumption that his sister would absorb the cost of his choices. But if I sell the boat, Jennifer and the boys will be devastated, Mike said, playing his final card. That boat is how we spend time together as a family. You'd be punishing my wife and children for something that's between you and me. The boat that you bought with money you borrowed from me and never intended to pay back, I clarified. The boat that your family has been enjoying for 5 years while I went without things I needed because I had loaned you money I couldn't afford to lose. The moral mathematics were simple and unforgiving. Mike's family had been enjoying luxuries purchased with money that belonged to me, while I had been living with the financial consequences of his irresponsibility. Fine, Mike said through gritted teeth. I'll sell the boat, but this is going to destroy my relationship with Jennifer when she finds out how much I owe you. Your relationship with Jennifer was built on lies about your financial situation, I pointed out. Maybe it's time for both of you to deal with the truth about who you really are and what you can actually afford. The conversation was brutal, but necessary. Mike was finally being forced to confront the consequences of his choices, and it was clear that he didn't like what he was discovering about himself. Lisa, I said, turning to my sister who had been watching Mike's interrogation with growing dread. Your turn. How do you plan to address the pattern of taking my support for granted while offering nothing in return? Lisa's defense was immediate and predictable. Sarah, that's not fair. I do plenty for this family. I organize the birthday parties and coordinate the holiday schedules and make sure everyone stays in touch with each other. You organize birthday parties that I pay for, I corrected. You coordinate holiday schedules that revolve around my availability to host and cook and clean. You make sure everyone stays in touch by calling me when you need information about other family members. The pattern was identical to what I had identified with Mike. Lisa was taking credit for family contributions that were actually supported by my labor and resources. What if, I suggested, you took responsibility for organizing and hosting the next 3 family holidays without any financial or logistical support from me? The proposal clearly terrified Lisa, who had never actually managed a family event from start to finish without significant help. She had been the front person for celebrations that I had designed, funded, and executed behind the scenes. "I don't know how to cook for that many people," she protested. "My kitchen isn't big enough, and I don't have the right dishes or serving pieces or anything. So you'll figure it out," I said simply. "The same way I've been figuring it out for 20 years. "But you're good at that stuff," Lisa said desperately. "You know how to plan menus and coordinate timing and make everything work together. I've never done anything like that before." "I wasn't born knowing how to plan menus and coordinate timing," I replied. "I learned those skills because I had to learn them, because no one else in this family was willing to take responsibility for making sure we could all spend time together." The conversation was exposing Lisa's fundamental dependence on me for things she had never even recognized as work. She had enjoyed the benefits of my efforts while remaining completely ignorant of what those efforts actually entailed. "Jessica," I said, shifting my attention to my youngest sister, who had been remarkably quiet throughout the confrontations with Mike and Lisa. "What do you think you should contribute to make up for 30 years of taking without giving?" Jessica's response was immediate and telling. "Sarah, I think you're being really unfair to everyone. We're family, and family members help each other without keeping score. This whole thing feels like you're trying to punish us for loving you." The manipulation was expertly crafted, reframing my legitimate grievances as evidence of my own moral failings. Jessica was suggesting that my desire for reciprocity was somehow incompatible with genuine family love. "You're right that family members help each other," I agreed. "So when do you plan to start helping?" The question was direct and unanswerable. Jessica had no examples of times when she had helped family members, no instances of sacrifice or support that she could point to as evidence of her own family commitment. "I help in different ways," she said vaguely. "I bring joy and energy to family gatherings. I make sure everyone has fun and doesn't get too serious about things." "You bring joy and energy that other people pay for and organize," I clarified. "You make sure you have fun while other people handle the work that makes that fun possible." Jessica's role in the family was pure consumption disguised as contribution. She was the entertainer who never paid for the entertainment, the party guest who never helped with the party planning. "I think," I continued, "that you should take over all of Mom and Dad's care coordination for the next year. Doctor's appointments, prescription management, insurance paperwork, transportation to medical procedures, all of it." The color drained from Jessica's face as she contemplated actually being responsible for the complex logistics of caring for aging parents. It was work that required attention to detail, emotional investment, and significant time commitments, none of which were Jessica's strengths. "Sarah, I can't do that," she said immediately. "I don't understand medical stuff, and I'm not good with paperwork. I'd probably mess something up and hurt Mom and Dad by accident." "Then you'll learn," I said simply. "The same way I learned when I took over their care coordination 3 years ago." "But you chose to do that," Jessica protested. "No one asked you to take over their medical stuff." "I chose to do it because if I didn't do it, it wasn't going to get done," I corrected. "Because everyone else in this family was too busy or too incompetent or too selfish to make sure our parents got the care they needed." The accusation was harsh, but accurate. Jessica and my other siblings had been content to let me handle the difficult aspects of caring for aging parents while they maintained their comfortable distance from anything unpleasant or demanding. "Now," I said, turning to address my parents directly, "let's talk about your role in creating and maintaining these family dynamics. My mother and father had been sitting quietly throughout my confrontations with their other children, probably hoping that their advanced age would exempt them from the kind of accountability I was demanding from everyone else. "Mom, Dad, I want you to think about the messages you sent to your children about family responsibilities and mutual support. What did you teach us about how family members should treat each other?" My father cleared his throat uncomfortably before answering. "We tried to teach all of you to be kind and generous and supportive of each other." "You taught us that Sarah would be kind and generous and supportive of everyone else," I corrected. "You taught my siblings that they could take without giving. And you taught me that giving without receiving was normal and expected." The distinction was crucial and devastating. My parents had raised children with completely different understandings of their family obligations, creating a dynamic that was inherently unsustainable. "When Mike borrowed money from me and didn't pay it back, did you ever ask him about it?" I asked. "That was between you and Mike," my mother said defensively. "We didn't want to get involved in financial matters between our adult children." "When Lisa repeatedly asked me to provide free childcare, but never offered to help me with anything in return, did you ever point out that the arrangement seemed unfair?" "We assumed you enjoyed spending time with your nieces and nephew," my father said. "You never complained about helping with the children. When Jessica missed family events because she prioritized her social life over her family obligations, did you ever express disappointment or suggest that her choices were selfish?" The silence that followed was answer enough. My parents had never held my siblings accountable for their behavior toward me because they had never recognized that behavior as problematic. "You created a family culture," I said, "where one child was expected to sacrifice for everyone else's benefit, while the other children were allowed to take that sacrifice for granted. You taught them that my needs were less important than theirs, and you taught me that my value was determined by how much I was willing to give up for other people." The weight of that accusation settled over my parents like a heavy blanket. They were beginning to understand that their parenting choices had contributed to the dysfunction I was describing, even though they had never intended to create such an imbalanced dynamic. "We didn't mean for things to turn out this way," my mother said quietly. "We just wanted all of our children to be happy and successful. But you defined my happiness and success differently than you defined theirs," I pointed out. "Their happiness came from receiving support and avoiding responsibility. My happiness was supposed to come from providing support and accepting responsibility for everyone else's problems." The conversation was forcing my parents to confront the unintended consequences of their parenting philosophy, and it was clear that they were struggling with the realization that their choices had caused real harm to their daughter. "So here's what's going to happen going forward," I announced, standing up and walking to the center of the pavilion where everyone could see me clearly. "Mike, you have 30 days to sell your boat and pay me back the money you owe me. If you don't, I'll be taking legal action to recover the debt, including garnishing your wages and placing liens on your other assets." Mike's face went white, but he nodded his understanding. He was finally learning that borrowing money came with actual obligations that couldn't be avoided indefinitely. "Lisa, you're hosting and organizing the next 3 family holidays without any financial or logistical support from me. If you can't handle that responsibility, then we'll know that family gatherings aren't actually important enough to you to put in the work required to make them happen." Lisa looked terrified, but she also nodded her agreement. She was going to learn what it actually took to create the family experiences she had always taken for granted. "Jessica, you're taking over all of Mom and Dad's care coordination for the next 12 months. If you can't handle that responsibility, then we'll know that you're not actually committed to being a contributing member of this family." Jessica started to protest, but I held up a hand to stop her. "This isn't a negotiation. These are the terms for continuing to have a relationship with me." "And Mom and Dad," I said, turning to face my parents directly. "You're going to start treating all of your children equally. No more asking me to handle things for my siblings. No more assuming that I'll solve problems that they created. No more tolerating behavior from them that you would never accept from me. The conditions were clear and non-negotiable. My family could choose to meet these requirements and rebuild our relationships on healthier terms, or they could choose to reject them and lose their relationship with me entirely. Now, I said, consulting my watch, it's almost midnight. The park gates will open at exactly 12:15, and you'll all be free to leave and return to your normal lives. The promise of release created a visible sense of relief in the pavilion, but I wasn't finished with my announcements. However, I continued, before you go, there's one more thing you need to understand. This isn't the end of our conversation. This is the beginning of a completely different kind of relationship. I walked over to a table where I had placed a stack of envelopes, each one labeled with a family member's name. These envelopes contain detailed documentation of everything we've discussed tonight, along with specific timelines and expectations for the changes I've outlined. You'll also find contact information for the family therapist I've hired to help us work through these issues together. The idea of family therapy clearly horrified several of my family members, but I pressed on. We'll be meeting every other week for the next 6 months to discuss our progress and address any problems that come up. Attendance is mandatory if you want to maintain a relationship with me. Sarah, Lisa said desperately, this feels like you're trying to control us instead of fix our family problems. I'm trying to create accountability, I corrected. For 34 years, I've allowed all of you to treat me badly without any consequences. That's ending tonight. The transformation in family dynamics was going to be difficult and uncomfortable for everyone, but it was also necessary if we were going to build something healthier from the wreckage of what we had been. There's one more thing, I said, walking over to a wall where I had hung a large photograph that had been covered by a cloth all evening. I pulled away the cloth to reveal a professional family portrait that had been taken 10 years earlier. In the photo, my parents sat in the center, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. Everyone was smiling and looked happy and connected, except that I wasn't in the photograph. This picture was taken at Mike's wedding reception, I explained. I was the one behind the camera, making sure everyone looked perfect and the lighting was right and all the important moments were captured. And as usual, I disappeared from the moment because I was too busy making sure everyone else was included. The visual metaphor was perfect and devastating. Even in our family photographs, I was invisible, present only as the person who documented everyone else's happiness. But this, I said, pulling out a second photograph and hanging it next to the first one, is going to be different. The new photograph was one I had commissioned just a week earlier. It showed me alone, sitting in the owner's chair in my office at Wonderland, surrounded by the documents and contracts that proved my ownership of the amusement park. I looked confident and powerful and completely in control of my own life. This is who I am now, I announced. This is who I've always been underneath the role you assigned to me. And this is who I'm going to continue being, regardless of whether you choose to accept the new terms of our relationship. The contrast between the two photographs was stark and symbolic. In one, I was invisible and absent. In the other, I was central and commanding. The difference illustrated the transformation that had been taking place in my life, and the choice my family now faced about whether they wanted to be part of that transformation. The gates will open in exactly 10 minutes, I said, checking my watch again. You're all free to leave whenever you're ready. But before anyone moved toward the exit, I had one final revelation to share. Oh, and there's something else you should probably know, I said casually. I'm not just the person who organized tonight's party. I'm also the person who owns Wonderland Amusement Park. The announcement hit them like a physical explosion. Jaws dropped, eyes widened, and several people made sounds of shock and disbelief. That's impossible, Mike said automatically. You don't have that kind of money. I have exactly that kind of money, I replied calmly. I've been building a very successful software company for the past 10 years while all of you assumed I was just playing with computers. The revelation recontextualized everything about our family dynamics. The person they had dismissed as unsuccessful and dependent was actually the most financially successful person in the family by a significant margin. I bought Wonderland 3 weeks ago, I continued. Partly as an investment, but mostly because I wanted to own the place where you left me behind in October. The poetic justice of the situation was beautiful and complete. The location of their casual cruelty had become the site of my triumph, and the place where they had abandoned me was now mine to control. Which brings me to the final condition of our new relationship, I said. All of you are banned from Wonderland Amusement Park for the rest of your lives. If any of you step foot on this property again without my explicit written permission, you'll be arrested for trespassing. The ban was both practical and symbolic. They would never again be able to enjoy the place where they had created one of my most painful memories, and they would have a permanent reminder of the consequences of taking my love and support for granted. You can't do that, Jessica protested. This place has been part of our family traditions for years. You can't just take that away from us. I can do exactly that, I replied. This is my property now, and I decide who is welcome here and who isn't. The power dynamic had shifted completely and permanently. The person who had once been at the mercy of their decisions was now the person making decisions that would affect their lives. As the clock struck midnight, the sound of the park gates opening echoed across the pavilion. My family members sat in stunned silence, processing everything that had happened and everything that had changed. One by one, they began to gather, their belongings and their sleeping children, preparing to leave the place where their old family dynamic had died and something new had been born. Lisa was the first to approach me as she prepared to leave. Sarah, she said quietly, I don't know how to fix what we've broken, but I want to try. The statement was simple but significant. For the first time in our relationship, Lisa was acknowledging that there was something broken that needed to be fixed. Then, show up to therapy, I said simply, and start planning Christmas dinner. Mike stopped beside my chair as he carried one of his sleeping sons toward the exit. I'll call you tomorrow about selling the boat, he said, his voice heavy with defeat and what might have been the beginning of genuine remorse. Jessica didn't speak to me as she left, but she picked up the envelope with her name on it and clutched it tightly as she walked away. The silence was probably the most honest communication we had shared in years. My parents were the last to leave, moving slowly and carefully as they processed the weight of everything they had learned about their family and themselves. Sarah, my mother said, stopping at the pavilion entrance, we love you very much, and we're sorry we didn't show that love in better ways. I love you too, Mom, I replied. That's why we're going to learn how to do this better. As their car lights disappeared into the distance, I stood alone in the pavilion where I had dismantled 34 years of dysfunctional family patterns and built the foundation for something healthier. The Christmas lights still twinkled overhead, beautiful and festive and now truly celebratory. I had given myself the gift I had always needed, the courage to demand better from the people who claimed to love me. Wonderland stretched out around me in the darkness, every ride and attraction now belonging to me. Every memory now reframed by my ownership of the place where those memories had been created. I pulled out my phone and took a selfie in front of the family photograph I had revealed earlier, documenting this moment when I had finally stopped being invisible in my own life. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Therapy sessions and difficult conversations, and the slow process of rebuilding relationships on healthier terms. Some of my family members would rise to the challenge and learn to treat me with the respect and reciprocity I deserved. Others would choose to walk away rather than change their behavior. But tonight, I had accomplished what I set out to do. I had shown them exactly what it felt like to be forgotten and left behind. I had forced them to confront the consequences of their choices, and I had claimed my power in a way that could never be undone. The woman who had been abandoned in a parking lot 2 months ago was gone forever. In her place stood someone who would never again accept being treated as invisible or unimportant. As I walked through my amusement park one final time before heading home, I smiled at the perfect symmetry of it all. They had forgotten me at Wonderland, so I had bought Wonderland and banned them from it forever. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. Sometimes it's getting everything. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.